Hello, America, and welcome to another episode of the Ultra MK podcast, where together we are reversing the narrative. And on today's show, I am thrilled to welcome a gentleman who is a Republican candidate for California Attorney General. He's a lifelong Californian, devoted husband and father of five. Gaetz is a battle-tested trial attorney who spent 10 years as Huntington Beach's elected city attorney. He launched the city's first local criminal prosecutor program, defending police officers in the court, and won and fought Sacramento overreach. He's been saving taxpayers over $300 million in his career. Later, he served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, with a proven record of putting public safety first. Our guest, Michael Gaetz, is ready to bring real change to California's top law enforcement in office.
That is our obligation, to inform and alert the American people, to make certain that they possess all the facts that they need and understand them as well, the perils, the prospects, the purposes of our program, and the choices that we face.
Michael Gaetz, welcome to the Ultra MK podcast, sir. How are you?
Great. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining with us. We really need tons of reform and tons of law and order to come back to California. Myself, as a native of California, I've seen some pretty radical things happen from Sacramento and some of the highest levels of law enforcement in our state. And it even dates back. I mean, when I really truly woke up as a citizen as to how much power an attorney general can have, a governor could have, and Sacramento can yield was during 2020's COVID pandemic,
Right.
in which at that time is Xavier Becerra, who was basically supporting all of the mandates that Gavin Newsom was putting forth in society. And they even tiered it by color. They called it the purple tier, in which they closed down businesses, churches, places of worship.
Yeah.
But then I was able to kind of poke holes just in common sense with things that were not, deemed unessential, or I guess were deemed essential and left open, like liquor stores and strip clubs in California.
Right.
So that was really bizarre to me. So with that being said, there's a lot to talk about as far as what you want to do once elected Attorney General. But first, let me just kind of talk a little bit about what your background is. So you've been in Huntington Beach for a long time and served as an attorney in that area.
Yeah. So I was in private practice for a number of years, and that's where I cut my teeth as a trial attorney. So I tell people this might be the first time when I'm Attorney General, this might be the first time we actually have a real attorney functioning as the Attorney General for the state of California, because we haven't had a real attorney in recent memory. They're just politicians. These are career politicians. Bonta was appointed by Newsom in 2021 as a politician to the position of Attorney General, and he's been acting as a politician ever since. He's not a serious lawyer. I am. I cut my teeth as a trial attorney for a number of years. Like I said, in private practice, I became partner at that law firm. And then in 2014, I decided to jump in the race for city attorney in Huntington Beach. That's an elected position in Huntington Beach. Not every city elects their attorney, but Huntington Beach does. It was a pretty big position because Huntington Beach is the 23rd largest city out of 482 cities in the state of California. So it's in the top 4% by size. So it's a very, very large city. It's 27 square miles, 200,000 residents, and we get 15 million visitors a year. So there's a lot going on, a lot of issues, a lot of responsibility, and a big need for good leadership, which is why I jumped in the race. I won that seat in 2014. I was reelected in 2018 and again in 2022. And then in 2025, I resigned from my post to take a job with the Trump administration, where I served at the Department of Justice for a year in Washington, D.C. And then I came back to run for Attorney General here in California. So I've had an amazing career. Just to give you a little snapshot of what I was able to do in Huntington Beach, I was not simply an elected official. I was a real lawyer, the top lawyer for the city, and I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. So in 2017, for instance, in response to the passage of Prop 47 and 57, which caused crime to rise everywhere throughout the state of California, in 2017, in response to that, I started the city's first criminal prosecutor program in the city attorney's office. And there we prosecuted crime at the city level, in addition to the county district attorney prosecuting crime. So we had two layers of prosecution, two different efforts to prosecute, and that produced amazing results. So while every other city was managing the increase in crime, we were attacking the increase in crime after Prop 47 and 57. And the results were amazing. So in the first year, crime dropped in Huntington Beach by double digits. And now, since 2017, Huntington Beach is considered in the top 10 safest cities in the state of California out of 482. So the top 10 safest cities, which is remarkable. We reduced homelessness. As you alluded to, I went to trial on many, many cases defending our officers when they were sued for doing their job. I even prevailed in 2022. This is just one example, but prevailed in 2022 in a $20 million police shooting case that was brought to Huntington Beach to sue two of our officers for doing their job. I went to trial in that case. After a 5-week jury trial, I got a complete defense verdict. We didn't end up paying anything on that case. In fact, the plaintiffs owe us $100,000 here in Huntington Beach in costs. So just great results. To your point about the COVID lockdowns and the COVID nonsense, Newsom came down to Huntington Beach and shut down our beaches during COVID. So we've got 8 miles of beautiful coastline where people were going to the beach during the COVID lockdowns to sort of get away from the lockdowns and enjoy themselves out in the sun. Newsom wouldn't have it, so he shut down our beaches with armed state troopers, concrete barricades, and bulldozers to push sand on the boardwalks to keep bikers away from the beach as well. And so I sued him, took him to court, and opened up our beaches again. Huntington Beach, I did the work to make Huntington Beach have a ban on mask mandates and vaccine mandates. I was the architect of Huntington Beach's voter ID law. So Huntington Beach has a local voter ID law. That was my work. I also was the architect of Huntington Beach's declaration that's a non-sanctuary city. So we are a non-sanctuary city in the state of California. We're the only one. I also was the architect of Huntington Beach's declaration that's a parent's right to know city. So we protect parents, and we are responding to the state's new law that basically mandates that teachers keep secrets from parents with regard to their children's gender identity and gender transition issues. So we're a parent's right to know city. So I've practiced in a lot of different areas of law, like you alluded to in the intro. I reduced crime. I was tough on crime. I was a top prosecutor. I was a civil attorney, taking many, many multi-million-dollar cases to trial and winning. I've never lost a cop case, by the way. Every time I've taken one of their cases to trial, and I wouldn't settle their cases, by the way. I believed in the work they did. I took them to trial. I had a winning record. I never lost a case. I did election integrity work. I did parental rights. I fought overreach. So when the state came down to Huntington Beach and tried to cram down a bunch of high density housing mandates, I fought that back. For years, I was in court litigating that myself. And then finally, another quick example is the state wrongfully withheld millions of dollars of taxpayer money from Huntington Beach taxpayers. I took the state to court. I sued Rob Bonta, and I won. So the state is now paying Huntington Beach taxpayers $38 million in money plus interest that the state should have paid many years ago. We recovered that by fighting in court and winning. So I'm viewed in Huntington Beach as a fighter because, look, I had nothing to lose. I was the elected city attorney of Huntington Beach. I only answered to the people of Huntington Beach, and I made it my mission to fight for the people of Huntington Beach. So I fought for everyday Californians, and a lot of the work that we did sort of spread throughout the state. Some other cities started to adopt what we were doing in Huntington Beach, but it's that kind of bold leadership that really, I guess, advanced the interests of everyday Californians that made me, garner a lot of support in the community. And so with sort of my reputation as a fighter and the groundswell of support that I've had here in Huntington Beach and Orange County, Southern California, I feel that I'm perfectly positioned to be running for Attorney General at this time.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer of judging a man by the fruits of his labor, and you have done an amazing job in the career that you've led so far, just from local service all the way up to the federal service. So, got to commend you there, and got to give you some accolades for all of that hard work, Michael.
Thank you.
So there is we were talking earlier, and there is a primary election coming up June 2nd. And for those who are watching in other places aside from California, we have what's called a jungle primary out here in California, where it'll come down to two candidates. They could be both Republican, both Democrat, or one Republican, one Democrat, that would then move past the jungle portion of primary and then go into a general situation. So from what you've said, that you and Rob Bonta are kind of the two front runners. And I do want to kind of shine a light on Rob Bonta. You did say that he was appointed by Gavin Newsom, so he never really was elected by the people until the primary part of his career. And when looking into his record and some of the things that I've been finding out about him, there's some really interesting things that happened where allegedly his campaign was spending campaign dollars to help protect him with a case out of the East Bay where he was connected with the Oakland mayor.
Right.
And some bribery charges were brought towards the mayor. Are you able to speak towards that situation, what that was about?
Yeah, so there's a lot of corruption, and corruption was found in Oakland, like you said, with the elected leaders there, the Duong family and the former mayor there. There's so many issues with Oakland specifically, but what's critical here for Rob Bonta is those are his friends, those are his associates. Rob Bonta is actually originally from Oakland, the Oakland area, and so these are his political alliances, these are his associations. And so that's why a number of investigative agencies, including the federal government, were approaching Rob Bonta to ask him very difficult questions about his associations with the corruption coming out of Oakland. And that's why he lawyered up. He spent $500,000 of campaign money, which is totally illegal and illicit, to spend campaign money to defend yourself when you're being investigated in the criminal context. So he was being asked a lot of questions that made him uncomfortable. So he lawyered up with criminal defense attorneys to defend himself, and he paid them out of his campaign finance money. So totally illegal, totally illicit. But what's also very important is that he even had to spend $500,000 on criminal defense attorneys simply to answer questions to the federal government and to other investigative agencies. And one might ask, who spends $500,000 on criminal defense attorneys? I mean, I've never had to spend $1 on criminal defense attorneys myself. I just answer the questions I'm asked, if I'm ever asked any, regardless of no matter what context it's in. I've never been asked questions in the criminal context, but regardless, you just answer the truth, right? You don't need to go out and spend $500,000 on criminal defense attorneys. So he definitely has a lot of issues, but he was appointed in 2021 by Newsom, like you said. And I think he was put there to run interference on rightful investigations and truth-seeking and justice. And he's there to cover for corruption. Perfect example is we're now hearing about the nearly $500 billion of lost taxpayer money through waste, fraud, and abuse. That's Sacramento, just to be clear, that's Sacramento losing our money. It's not like it just evaporated. That's the leaders in Sacramento. They lost our money through waste, fraud, and abuse. And that 500 billion has happened over the past 5 years. That's the same timetable or the same timeline in which Rob Bonta has been in office. So the fraud, waste, and abuse started to balloon as soon as he got appointed into office, and it hasn't stopped. And he has never launched an investigation or asked any questions. He just recently held a press conference citing that he found 14 fraudulent hospice locations in the state of California. Now, there's a lot wrong with that. First of all, that press conference was thrown together very quickly and very last minute, and it came days after a poll came out that showed that he was only at 40% in this race right now. So he was only polling at 40%. This is a race in which, because it's so new, it's so fresh, I just got in the race myself 12 weeks ago, he should be polling at 60% or higher. So he's the incumbent in a deep blue state. He should be polling at 60% or higher. The poll came out a few weeks ago, showing he's only at 40%. So he's 10 points behind break even. I mean, that's a disaster. That's panic time. And the response to the panic is clear. He then hurried up and put together a press conference saying, we found 14 fraudulent hospice locations in the state of California. Here's the other problem with that. All of that is based on public information. There was no proprietary or forensic or investigative work on his part. That's all in the public domain. In fact, there's a whole lot more in the public domain. We know from what the federal government has uncovered in the past number of months that there's over 400 fraudulent hospice locations just in LA County alone. So Rob Bonta is bragging about finding 14, yet we know that there are over 400 in Los Angeles County alone. So he's a day late and a dollar short. He showed up quickly at a press conference to try to brag about something to distract people from the fact that for 5 years, he has never lifted a finger on the waste, fraud, and abuse. He's a disaster. He's not doing his job. He's weaponized his office, and he's just a pure politician running as or acting as the top law enforcement official in the state of California. We do not need politicians in these offices. We need real lawyers and real everyday Californians who are willing to fight for everyday Californians. I am an everyday Californian. I'm a fighter. I have a record for success as a lawyer in the courtroom. I'm a real lawyer. In fact, I'm actually a member of the U.S. Supreme Court Bar. So if I was called upon today to argue before the United States Supreme Court, I could show up tomorrow and argue. So I am a real lawyer. I've taken many multi-million-dollar cases to trial. I've gotten fantastic results. But right now we have a politician who's running interference and covering for corruption in office as Attorney General, and that's Rob Bonta. We've got to make a change, ladies and gentlemen, if we're going to rescue California.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Michael. And I hate to bring Mr. Bonta's wife into this, but Assemblywoman Mia Bonta recently has been leading the charge with Assembly Bill 20, the writing of Assembly Bill 2624, which they're calling the Stop Nick Shirley Act, which to me, especially as a podcaster, a seeker of truth, and somebody who wants to restore justice to our state and our country, when I see this type of collusion amongst politicians and people in power, it really makes me want to focus in on the motives. And I'm just going to show a quick little 3-minute video that Nick Shirley put together, just kind of explaining what this assembly bill would do should it pass. So let me just go ahead and share this with our viewers. One moment here.
About the Stop Nick Shirley Act.
I think you're a psycho scam artist.
They don't want to end their fraud racket. A lot of the politicians, they benefit from the political organizations, and so they want this racket to continue. They don't want the truth to get out.
Stop fraud investigations, but you're the one who signed off and you're a co-author of it. Here in California, they are trying to pass the Stop Nick Shirley Act. The official title of this bill is AB 2624, and today we're going to be confronting the legislators that are trying to pass this bill. And if this bill were to get passed, instead of going after the fraudsters, they're trying to make it criminal to go after the people that are committing this fraud. For instance, it would become criminal to film and reveal info on taxpayer-funded immigration services like healthcare, which would include daycare, hospices. It also covers counseling services, translation services, and immigration legal services. So for instance, if the Quality Learning Center was inside of California, it would be illegal to expose them. It would make it illegal to film government-funded NGOs. And this bill essentially wants to shield the info of immigrant support services from the public. So your tax dollars, you'd have no idea where it's going because it would then become confidential and you would not be able to see how much money that NGO is getting if it's going towards immigrant services. And what makes this bill super interesting is the lady who created this bill, her name is Mia Bonta. Her husband is the Attorney General of California named Rob Bonta. You cannot make this up. So you have the Attorney General who's supposed to prosecute and go after the fraudsters, and then you have his wife who's trying to pass bills to go after the people exposing the fraud. Like, seriously, this is absolutely crazy. And the AG, Rob Bonta, just a few days ago said they were cracking down on the fraud way before certain people came into the state.
We've been doing it successfully before certain people in this country decided to think about it for the first time.
However, it was only after I exposed over $100 million in fraud they actually made any arrest here inside of California. Let's say this bill gets passed. What could happen to you if you expose fraud or go and look into immigration services? Well, you could receive a $4,000 fine underneath a civil fine, a $10,000 fine if it's criminal, and a $50,000 fine if it becomes a felony. You may also face potential imprisonment and your content be forced to be taken down. This is a complete violation of the First Amendment, as they are trying to take down and suppress your own speech, make it so you can't film in public, which is taking away your freedom of press. There's a whole lot of issues with this bill, and today we're going to be confronting those that co-authored, signed, and passed this bill. And so truly, every single day here in America, you are learning more and more about the fraud that is taking place. And if you want to become a member of the Anti-Fraud Club.
So I just want to commend Nick Shirley. I mean, ever since the Minnesota fraud exposure, and now he's come into California. To me, I think he's inspiring so many journalists, citizen journalists, podcasters to really do the work that the mainstream media has refused to do. And so I just like to get your take on that apparent collusion amongst Rob Bonta and his wife Mia Bonta. It just seems like they're trying to get ahead of the fraud that's been happening here in California and making a bill that would impose laws against people to make them fearful to not want to expose the fraud, because they specifically in the verbiage of the bill, it talks about immigration NGOs and protecting the personal information, which I'm not a fan of doxing anybody. I don't think people should be putting other people's personal residence and phone number and things like that on the internet. But the way that the verbiage is loosely written, and it includes non-governmental organizations, legal clinics, and healthcare centers, people working within immigration, it just seems like they just don't want anybody to pay attention to those mechanisms. I just want to get your take on what you think about this bill, AB 2624. And once you get elected, what can you do with within your capacity? I know Sacramento has a lot to do with it, and legislators have a lot to do with it. But is there anything that you can do to suppress this?
Yeah, so there's a whole lot to unpack there. First of all, when it comes to the NGOs and these organizations taking state money, they effectively should be treated as quasi-public agencies. They're taking taxpayer money, and so they should be subject to scrutiny, subject to public scrutiny. So they shouldn't be protected or shielded. So that's absolutely ridiculous. But the association between the sponsor of the bill, Mia Bonta, and then the Attorney General, Rob Bonta, I mean, that speaks volumes in and of itself, right? That's a high level of corruption when you have one legislature covering for the Attorney General and the Attorney General covering for the legislature, which is Mia Bonta. And here's why. Because what this bill does is it attempts to, and actually does, once it's fully implemented and enforced, to violate the First Amendment of everyday Californians. So, and frankly, anybody else who comes into the state to do the same type of work that Nick Shirley's doing. It's violative of the First Amendment. This is an attack not only on our constitutional rights, but this bill is also just an attack on sort of the fundamental nature of the way the American existence or the American experience is supposed to be. Our government belongs to the people. We are a nation of everyday citizens. We are not a nation of a monarch. We are not a nation of a dictatorship. We are not a nation of a government controlling us. Our government is supposed to be by the people, for the people. It's supposed to be the people getting elected to the office. And so for the government to basically create this wedge issue where it's now attacking everyday Californians or everyday citizens who are simply asking questions of the government or asking questions about how government money is spent. And actually, that's taxpayer money, right? So let's not forget that. How our taxpayer money is spent. That it's really an attack on democracy, and it's an attack on the American system. So I maintain that this bill, this Mia Bonta bill, as I call it, is an attack on the Constitution and our constitutional rights on the one hand, but it's also an attack on our fundamental way of life here in America and the way our system works. Now, what am I going to do as Attorney General? First of all, I'm going to be very aggressive, and I put a video out on social media about this already in response to this bill, that I'm going to be very, very aggressive in protecting Nick Shirley, the conduct of Nick Shirley in this way and other Nick Shirleys throughout the state of California. Anyone and everyone should be allowed or entitled to or have the opportunity to be a citizen journalist and go up to anybody that they want and ask tough questions. That's the way our society has always worked, and that's the way it should continue to work. I will go to Sacramento and I will be very proactive in defending the rights of Nick Shirley and other Nick Shirleys like him. Period. There's no excuses, no exceptions on that. When it comes to the legislation itself, we will see if it's signed into law. It hasn't been signed into law yet. If it's signed into law and then I become Attorney General, I will have the prosecutorial discretion to enforce the law or not. I will also be in a position to pick apart the law. So where there are state laws that are violative of federal law, like this one appears to be, and we will see if it gets signed into law in the first place and gets enforced, and then we get to see how it's enforced. So there's a little bit that remains to be seen. But the fact that it appears to violate federal law, I will then work with the governor to strike the portions of the law that are violative of federal law by executive order, because no state can pass a law that conflicts with federal law, well-established federal law. So the state just simply can't violate federal law. And it appears that this bill is violating federal law. It's violating the First Amendment. So there's a number of things that I can do on day one when I'm the Attorney General to protect Nick Shirley, to protect other Nick Shirleys, and frankly, to protect the constitutional rights of all Californians. This just underscores how lawless Rob Bonta is and how Mia Bonta is and how corrupt they are. I call them the corrupt family of California. They are elitists in Sacramento who are not only completely out of touch with everyday Californians, but they are lawless. They are completely disregarding the First Amendment and disregarding our constitutional rights. And Rob Bonta, this is not the first time. He's got a pattern of doing this. He's been doing it ever since he was appointed as Attorney General in 2021. He's been doing this year after year after year. And so this has got to come to an end. And what the listeners need to know is if we're ever going to get California back, if we're ever going to rescue California, if we're ever going to get somebody in government at the highest levels to protect our constitutional rights again, they need to make a change. They need to elect me as Attorney General. They need to elect a Republican governor like Steve Hilton. We need to get new leaders in Sacramento so that we can change the course of California. California is on the brink. It's broken right now, but it's not lost. But it will be lost if we do not act in this election to rescue California. Our constitutional rights are at stake, and our everyday American way of life is at stake. And so it's a very important election. And so I'm really hoping for the support of the people. Got to get the word out, spread the word. We got to elect me, Michael Gates, for Attorney General.
Michael, I really wanted to ask you some kind of hard-hitting questions that are really kind of tough for a lot of people, a lot of average, everyday working class citizens to conceive, and that is harming children. And I know that America, in California in particular, has some of the highest statistics of human and child trafficking,
Right.
in the world from what we're finding, especially under the former administration, the Biden administration, with open border policies. It has opened up so much criminality with human and child trafficking,
Yeah.
especially through our state. We're a port state, so we have Long Beach, we have Oakland, we have ports where potential trafficking could happen, as well as the 99 and Highway 5 corridor. I know that there's been many cases. Some haven't been quite talked about very much. Some have, but what is your stance and position on fighting against child and human trafficking?
Yeah, so what I've said from the beginning of my campaign in January, and I've said it consistently throughout, is one of the primary animating, motivating factors for me in this race. One of the main reasons why I'm even in this race and I want to fight this fight is there is a real good versus evil going on. There's a battle here in California, and I am fighting for the good. I want to restore California. I want to rescue California. One of the primary animators, the primary motivators for me in this race is to protect the most vulnerable in our society. And that's in the context of crime. So some of the most vulnerable communities, some of the most vulnerable neighborhoods in our state are subject to the highest rates of violent crime. And I'm going to attack that. I'm going to end that. I want to protect our families, make our communities safe, make our streets safe, make our neighborhoods safe, right? On the one hand. On the other hand, with regard to human trafficking, and this, I will tie in child prostitution too, which is happening in the streets of Los Angeles. If you go out onto the streets near Skid Row or around Skid Row, you can see in broad daylight, you can see young girls being trafficked for prostitution. And it's being allowed to happen because the local authorities and the state views those young girls as victims, not criminals. And so they're basically saying we can't arrest them or approach them because they're being trafficked. Well, but they're also being victimized, and we're not lifting a finger to rescue them. I am going to be very, very tough on this issue. We are going to protect the most vulnerable in our society, whether it's high crime in vulnerable neighborhoods, or it's our young girls out on the streets, or it's our young people in hospitals being subjected as minors to trans surgeries. Rob Bonta has actually sued hospitals, including a children's hospital, to force them to perform trans surgeries on minors. I am going to dismiss those lawsuits on day one, and I'm actually going to prosecute doctors and hospitals that seek to mutilate our children. So I'm going to be very, very tough and aggressive. For people should know too, the Attorney General does have a lot of authority in the state of California. I have purview over there's 58 counties. I have purview over all 58 sheriffs and all 58 district attorneys. And so I'm going to work with them on a daily basis. I get to set the standard, the enforcement standard. I get to set the tough on crime policies throughout the state of California, and they have to implement it and effectuate it. If they don't, I can reach down and prosecute those cases myself in their jurisdictions, and I will. I'm going to be very, very tough on crime. So when it comes to things like young girls walking on the street or being trafficked, like you were alluding to, we are absolutely going to work with all federal agencies and local agencies to put an end to it. And we're going to stop the cartels. We're going to stop anybody involved in human trafficking. And we're going to rescue our young people. As you know from some of the conversations a couple years ago about the border and what it has allowed, the open border has allowed in our country, we know that there's a loss or a misplacement or a lack of accounting for over 300,000 young people in our country. And those are people who crossed the border and then just got lost into our country. I know Tom Homan and the White House has been looking for those children. They have found a number of those children, but estimates are that there are quite a number of those children in California. We are going to work with federal agencies, and we're going to work with state and local to find those children as well, to rescue them from trafficking, to rescue them from harm, and to protect them. So like I said, it's one of my highest priorities. I've been proud about it throughout my campaign so far, and I'm going to continue to beat this drum that when I am in office, we are going to go after criminals. We're going to end crime. We're going to end human trafficking in the state of California.
And real quick, I know our time is running short, but I wanted to get one case brought to your attention. I was telling your PR girl about this specific case that kind of really brought my attention to it. It's out of the state of Texas, and the gentleman who has brought this case to the Texas Supreme Court, his name is Mitch Vexler. And for those who want to look up the case number, it's case number 25-0615. And this is a case that ties into fraud, the highest level with the real estate market. So basically, the way that this case is kind of rolling out is there's systematic property tax fraud and school bond fraud that they're finding in Texas. And the core argument is appraisal districts deliberately inflate property values, which lets school districts issue bigger bonds than they should. These bonds then get paid back through even higher taxes, creating what this gentleman, Mitch Vexler, is calling a Ponzi scheme. And currently, he's a lead plaintiff in this case against the Denton Central Appraisal District. But when watching, because Mr. Vexler has published all kinds of information, evidence, things that he's found in his research, and he's saying that this is a national problem, and that states like California, because of our dense population and because our real estate market is out of control with how expensive it is to live here. Do you think that this could be something that you and other people could potentially look into in the state of California?
Absolutely. And nothing is off the table. We're going to be very busy when I take office because there's a lot of issues to tackle. Excuse me. This is one of them. And so we're absolutely going to do that. And what's ironic about that situation is that's what they alleged Donald Trump did with his properties. And so he was prosecuted criminally for that in New York. But setting that aside, yes, we are going to. There's going to be an anti-fraud division in my department, and we are going to be tackling fraud throughout the state of California, no matter what form it takes, whether it is in the homeless industrial complex, whether it is in hospice or in-home healthcare, or whether it's in the real estate arena. So we're going to be tough. I mean, the reality is that we have. Look, there's a culture in California of lawlessness, and everybody and everything seems to be getting away with everything, right? And so we've got to put an end to that. We've got to get back to the rule of law and law and order. And I tell people throughout the state of California as I travel on the campaign trail, if I do only one thing in office, which I will do many, I assure you, on day one, I'm going to do many. I've got a list, I've got a checklist. But if I do only one thing, I'm going to return California to the rule of law and to return it to a state of law and order. And you do that by being aggressive on prosecuting crime, being tough on the law, being diligent, being, in fact, forceful. I mean, prosecutors throughout the state of California, through all of my district attorneys and their offices, they should all have a zero crimes agenda. I mean, prosecutors should have a bias or a prejudice to be so tough on crime that they're actually getting crime to zero in their jurisdictions. That should be their goal. And if that's not their goal, they're not doing their jobs. So the lack of prosecution or prosecutorial discretion to me is actually an abuse of discretion. The fact that they're not doing their job is an abuse of discretion. Our prosecutors need to get back to work and they need to be tough on crime. But that necessarily includes what you're referring to is to be investigating any allegations of fraud, to be looking into these arenas like real estate or property value inflation, school board, the way that the school, like you said, the way the school boards are doing it, or the districts are doing it, or the states are doing it, or the counties are doing it. However, they're evaluating those properties. All of that needs to be looked into if there are allegations of fraud. So nothing is off the table as far as I'm concerned. We're going to keep everything on the table and we're going to tackle everything because that's how you change the culture in California. You change the culture to get back to the rule of law and to return the state to a state of law and order. So we've been lawless with Rob Bonta for the past 5 years, and you put me in office, and we are going to return to the law. We are going to return to law and order throughout the state of California. I absolutely guarantee it. That is my singular mission, if nothing else.
Outstanding. I'd like to share your website with the audience so that way they can learn more about you, the campaign. They can help by donating or I believe you're still looking for volunteers with certain jobs. So let me go ahead and bring up the website here. Folks, you can find him at Gates, the number 4, AG.com, Gates4AG.com, and check out his website. You can learn more about Michael and his mission to restore California and to restore law and order. You can learn more about all of his past accomplishments. Get to know Michael's a family man, which I love very much. He's a proud husband and father, and we need more people like this to run in office. And I feel that he has all the right qualifications, the right track record, and all of the right mission. I mean, his vision meets his mission, which I think is fantastic. So, folks, if you can visit his website. And Michael, I wish you nothing but the best in the rest of the primary election. And
Thank you.
And then on to the general. And I'd love to see more happening with you, and I'd love to bring you back onto the show if that's all right.
It would be a pleasure. Thank you for having me, and thank you to the audience for listening. And if the audience can help, like you said, just get the word out. If we turn enough people on to this important race for Attorney General and turn enough people on to my campaign and get them informed, it's going to be an easy decision. We're either going to have more of Rob Bonta, more corruption, more lawlessness in California, or we're going to rescue California with good candidates like myself getting elected. So with your help and support, we can do this together. I absolutely believe it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks, thank you so much for joining another episode of the Ultra MK podcast, where together we are reversing the narrative. God bless you. God bless your family. And most of all, God bless America. We'll see you on the next episode.